one specifically thing she said that was going to really impact white people. Jack up interest rates, jack up debt, print money to provide housing, and everyone pays 30% for housing.
Have you ever listened to a politician outline a proposal that sounds so comforting and polished that for a moment you almost relax, and then the part of your brain that handles real-world responsibilities steps in and asks, wait a second, how would this actually function? That reaction is exactly what many people are having about the New York housing proposal clip currently circulating online. In the segment, a highly complex housing crisis is addressed with what appears to be a straightforward fix. Expand public control, cap housing payments at a percentage of income, and rely on federal involvement to keep everything financially stable. If you're already skeptical, you're not alone. And if you're open to the concept, stay with it, because the practical details deserve careful attention. If you appreciate thoughtful breakdowns that focus on policy mechanics rather than slogans, consider subscribing and sharing your perspective. Discussions like this benefit from hearing different viewpoints, especially when the stakes are this significant. Here's the context. Joe Rogan is reacting to a clip of Zohran Mamdani describing a collective housing framework. The idea is structured around housing being managed through a public or collective system. Residents would contribute 30% of their income toward rent. If someone has no income, they would pay nothing. If someone earns $500,000 per year, they would contribute 30% of that amount. The broader system, according to the explanation, would be supported through government coordination, cash flow planning, and subsidies to ensure stability. On the surface, it's easy to see why this sounds appealing. The model is simple. It applies one clear rule to everyone. It presents itself as predictable and fairness-oriented, limiting housing burdens across income levels. But then the key question arises: how does the federal government sustain the cost of subsidizing housing at this scale? When pressed on funding, the explanation suggests that the federal government has the authority to expand the money supply in order to finance the program. That answer shifts the conversation from housing fairness to broader economic concerns about fiscal policy, inflation, and long-term sustainability.
This one's what she wants to kill real estate value. That's her idea. Like, she wants to literally to make housing more affordable. She wants to kill real estate value.
It's an inelastic good. You can't.
Well, it's moronic thinking.
Oh, this woman.
Listen to this lady. Listen to this.
And she has like $1 million house?
Her mom does.
Oh.
Well,
in
of course.
Which the housing is owned by a collective and people are paying 40% of their income in order to live in their housing. If your income is zero, you pay zero. If your income is $500,000 a year, you're paying 30% of that. And the government is providing the government is the sort of owner, or not even the owner. The government doesn't have to be the owner, but the government is what's making sure all of that sort of works in cash flows.
The debt to GDP ratio right now is the highest since World War II. So how can the federal government also afford to start subsidizing rental housing costs?
Oh, so that's the direction we're taking. The idea that funding simply comes from expanding the money supply. That's the central pillar, not a detailed revenue plan, not a supply side adjustment, not a roadmap for encouraging private development to accelerate construction. Instead, the emphasis is on monetary expansion as the primary solution. Rogan's reaction reflects strong skepticism toward that approach. He doesn't frame it as a minor disagreement. He characterizes it as unrealistic, suggesting it sounds less like a structured policy framework and more like something formed in the moment. His broader concern is that if inflation rises, everyday costs, rent, groceries, general living, expenses could increase, potentially placing more pressure on residents. The larger issue he points to is that housing is not a product that can be rapidly scaled through intention alone. It is what economists describe as relatively inelastic in the short term. New housing units cannot appear instantly. Construction requires land, materials, skilled labor, regulatory approvals, financing structures, and most importantly, aligned incentives. Without addressing those underlying constraints, critics argue that simply increasing available money does not automatically translate into more homes. It may shift demand, but supply remains limited unless the structural bottlenecks are resolved.
The federal government prints money. The federal government can provide money for us.
So it's by printing money.
Sure.
That's her idea. Print money. The federal government print money to provide housing, jack up interest rates, jack up debt, print money to provide housing.
And this is where proposals like this often run into trouble, because they're presented in a simplified, almost storybook way. The policy is introduced, fairness is restored, and the ending writes itself. In practice, markets don't operate like that. When returns are capped and the housing sector shifts toward a government-directed payment structure, the private actors who typically build and finance projects, developers, investors, lenders, may reassess whether participation still makes sense. If you design a system where higher earners contribute 30% of income and lower earners contribute nothing, you potentially create strong demand incentives. Guaranteed housing at a fixed share of income is understandably attractive. At the same time, if builders are told their potential returns are limited and oversight will increase, some may hesitate. Demand can rise quickly, while supply may not respond at the same pace. Even supporters of active government involvement generally acknowledge that large bureaucratic systems are not always known for speed or predictability. Administrative complexity can slow approvals, delay funding, and introduce uncertainty into long-term projects. When financing relies heavily on expanding the money supply, additional macroeconomic concerns enter the conversation. Inflation operates independently of political messaging. If more money circulates without a corresponding increase in available housing units, prices can rise. Housing markets are particularly sensitive to capital flows. When demand-side subsidies or easier financing expand purchasing power, land values, construction materials, labor costs, and borrowing expenses can all increase. In that scenario, the intended beneficiaries may still face higher overall costs. Critics argue that without directly addressing structural supply barriers, zoning, permitting, material shortages, labor constraints, financial interventions alone may intensify competition for limited units. Those raising concerns are not necessarily opposing affordability goals. Many simply point to historical examples where well-intentioned interventions produced unintended side effects. The debate centers less on compassion and more on whether simplified solutions can withstand the complexity of real-world housing markets.
First of all, why are you talking to me in a hoodie? What mental illness is that? Like, how dare you? First of all, you look like powder. You look like, first of all, get a blowout, throw some mascara. Like, are we professionals anymore? You're in a Costco hoodie and a t-shirt. Like, what are we doing?
Well, they've confronted her about these ideas and she breaks down crying.
There's also a side moment in the clip where Rogan and Whitney Cummings comment on Weaver's appearance. She's speaking in a casual setting, wearing a hoodie, and they question the informality. In a roast-style comedy context, that exchange may land as humor, but it also shifts attention away from the substantive policy discussion. Clothing isn't the core issue. Professional attire does not automatically validate an argument, and casual attire does not automatically weaken one. The real question is whether the proposal reflects a clear understanding of incentives, supply limitations, and macroeconomic dynamics. Someone can present an unsound plan in a formal suit, and someone else can present a well-structured argument in casual wear. The presentation style is secondary to the underlying economic reasoning. Stripped down to its essentials, the proposal centers on heavy government involvement in housing, fixed payment structures tied to income, and federal financial backing if revenue gaps emerge. Critics argue that relying on monetary expansion to close those gaps raises legitimate fiscal concerns. Supporters may see it as a bold corrective to market failures. The disagreement is ultimately about economic mechanics, not wardrobe choices. Discussions about inequality, wealth, and public responsibility often bring in broader social commentary. Rogan suggests that some policy advocates are motivated by a desire to address disparities through sweeping reform. Whether that framing is accurate is open to debate, but the central evaluation remains the same. Does the policy align with economic realities and long-term sustainability?
Training was UCB. Like, she's just improvising an idea. No, the government does that. She's not even making eye contact. Like, damn.
Well, a lot of these wokies, they come from rich families. They feel bad about being privileged.
Yeah.
And one specifically thing she said that was going to really impact white people.
What is fascinating about that is that because I think she believes she's coming from the moral high ground, I think this is what's really sort of, and as someone who I feel like is similar to you, and then I'm like, I was as liberal. I had blue hair, you guys. Like
yeah, I remember when you had blue hair.
I rescue pit bulls. Like it doesn't get any more liberal than me. Like it doesn't get any more. But the whole idea with being liberal is like,
you don't have to agree with every label being used to recognize the broader dynamic at play. It's a real and recurring pattern. People who are financially secure often feel a sincere desire to address large social problems. That impulse can be rooted in empathy, but in highly emotional policy moments, proposals sometimes shift from outcome-focused solutions to symbolic gestures. When that happens, policy can become more about signaling values than about testing whether the mechanics will hold up. The emphasis moves toward demonstrating moral commitment rather than carefully stress testing the economic consequences. Critics describe this as performative problem solving, where the appeal lies in the message rather than in measurable results. Whitney Cummings points to what she sees as inconsistency in modern political discourse, arguing that certain principles are applied selectively depending on context. Whether someone agrees with her specific examples or not, the larger observation resonates with many observers. Contemporary debates often revolve around tone, identity, and posture as much as they do around coherent frameworks. Housing, however, is an arena where symbolic politics collides quickly with hard constraints. It is not an abstract concept. It involves materials, labor, financing structures, zoning regulations, land availability, and interest rates. These elements operate within physical and economic limits. A housing shortage cannot be resolved through messaging alone. It requires tangible increases in supply and aligned incentives. Without those foundations, even well-intentioned policies may struggle to achieve their stated goals.
Deal with being liberal is like, you had me at, we're not racist, everyone's equal. But diversity, but then it turns into diversity.
Communism.
Diversity, but not diversity of thought.
Right.
The hypocrisy of it got, and I think that as comics, we're people who, I may not be an expert in politics, but I'm an expert on hypocrisy. When you grow up around alcoholics who say, I love you, and then their behavior's incongruous, you look for patterns of hypocrisy. That's just what we're wired to do. So it just started to just be like, hold on, we don't believe in gender, but we need a female president. You're like, huh? And then it's like, my body, my choice. Unless it's a baby that needs a vaccine for hepatitis B.
Now consider the broader political implications. The discussion isn't limited to Rogan's reaction. The transcript also references Bill Maher, who raises a strategic warning for Democrats. His argument is that elevating figures associated with ambitious, highly ideological proposals could create electoral vulnerability. Maher emphasizes that New York is not just another municipality. It serves as a major media hub, a financial center, and a cultural reference point for much of the country. Because of that influence, policy experiments or political messaging that gain traction, they're often shape narratives far beyond city limits. In his view, if New York becomes closely associated with controversial or polarizing policy models, that perception may not remain localized. Instead, it could influence national political branding. Opponents could point to developments in the city as illustrative examples in broader campaign messaging. The central concern he raises is strategic rather than personal. How policies and public figures are framed in high visibility cities can carry consequences well beyond their immediate jurisdiction.
I mean, I read these 74% are for democratic socialism. Only 16% favor capitalism. Is this going to be a country that I don't recognize in 5 to 10 years if we don't have these two pillars? If we don't, where are the Democrats going with this? If Mondami is the face of the Democrats on the East Coast and Katie Porter is the face on the West Coast, I don't know if that's great politically for that part.
Maher also raises a point that often receives less attention. Even if a mayor does not have the authority to fundamentally transform an entire economic system, local leadership can still shape national perception. Visible outcomes in major cities influence how broader political philosophies are judged. If residents perceive that crime is increasing, public services are declining, or living costs are rising sharply, many voters do not parse the fine. Details of budget allocations or or macroeconomic pressures. They rarely distinguish between municipal authority and larger structural forces. Instead, they associate outcomes with the prevailing leadership and its ideological framing. That dynamic can quickly become a political liability. Many working-class voters and moderates are less interested in ambitious experimentation and more focused on stability, affordability, and effective administration. For them, daily functionality matters more than sweeping narratives. There is also an important electoral reality. Campaigns are not decided solely by the most active voices on social media or by highly engaged activists. They are often influenced by less vocal voters who prioritize predictability and economic security. When proposals emphasize large-scale monetary expansion for housing, some hear an effort to help, others interpret it as potential instability. The gap between intention and perception can significantly shape electoral outcomes.
New York is New York. It's definitely the media capital, the financial capital. It is a bellwether like no other city is in this country. So don't tell me that who the mayor of New York is doesn't matter.
Let me play devil's advocate for a second. Do you think, let's say, on the seize the means of production, do you think that the mayor, that one person, if he is a democratic socialist, do you think that he would have the power and influence to be able to, usher in socialism?
He definitely has the power and influence to elect J.D. Vance or whoever is the Republican candidate next time. It is a walking commercial for the Republican Party.
What makes this even more frustrating is that there are serious, workable approaches to housing reform. They just aren't flashy. They don't fit neatly into a slogan. Real reform involves trade-offs and long technical work. Zoning reform, for example. Streamlining approvals so projects don't take 10 years to break ground. Cutting layers of regulation that drive construction costs to extreme levels in major cities. It means allowing more density where infrastructure can support it. Improving transit so people can live farther from urban cores without sacrificing hours of their day commuting. Creating incentives for builders that encourage supply growth without turning development into a politically micromanaged process. But those solutions don't generate the same emotional reaction as promising guaranteed housing funded by taxing the rich. They don't deliver that immediate moral satisfaction. So instead, the debate drifts towards sweeping promises, rate services, expansive subsidies, universal guarantees. Everyone appreciates affordability. Nobody objects to lower costs. The mature question, however, is always the same. Who ultimately pays? How is it structured? And what are the secondary effects? When costs are obscured, postponed, or shifted into complex funding mechanisms, they don't disappear. They reemerge later, often in the form of inflation, service reductions, higher taxes, or business contraction. Historically, price pressures and economic strain tend to affect ordinary households first. Rising costs, reduced service quality, shrinking job markets. Those consequences rarely begin with policymakers or advocates. They are felt at the consumer level. The broader transcript then expands into a discussion of socialism, referencing familiar historical examples like the USSR, North Korea, and Venezuela. That comparison itself is debated. Some argue those systems were mismanaged or authoritarian distortions. Others contend they represent structural flaws. That argument continues in cycles. The consistent theme in reform debates is the belief that this time the implementation would be different, better designed, more humane, more efficient. Whether that confidence is justified depends on execution, incentives, and economic realities rather than intention alone.
And on the other side, you have the guy running in New York, Mandami, right? Okay, who's like a straight up communist. I mean, he is. He talks about, the things that communists say. I mean, he wants free grocery stores, free buses.
I want him to win.
You want him to win?
Yeah. I think every 20 years or so.
Wait.
We need every 20 years or so, we need a conspicuous, confined experiment with socialism so we can crack it up again. Socialist slogan used to be, workers of the world unite, you have nothing to lose but your chains. The new socialist slogan is, trust us, this time it won't be a mess.
Even setting aside large historical comparisons, you don't need to reference major geopolitical examples to understand what can happen when incentives are overlooked and complex markets are centrally directed. Smaller scale cases offer lessons of their own. Price ceilings that unintentionally trigger shortages, heavy regulation that discourages production, or public projects that balloon in cost without delivering expected results. Housing is particularly sensitive to these dynamics because it operates with within tight supply constraints. Regulations alone cannot create abundance. Additional units require construction, land use adjustments, capital, investment, and labor. Without expanding supply, policy tools often redistribute existing scarcity rather than eliminate it. Another complication is distributional impact. Large public programs sometimes end up benefiting individuals who are well positioned to navigate bureaucratic systems. Those with time, familiarity with paperwork, and access to information may secure placements more easily. Connections and procedural knowledge can matter. Meanwhile, households slightly above eligibility thresholds may find themselves in a difficult position. They do not qualify for subsidies, but also face higher prices in a constrained private market. As costs rise and availability tightens, they may experience pressure from both sides. Over time, that structure can resemble a tiered system. One group operates within subsidized stability, while another competes in a tighter market with fewer supports. Whether intentional or not, that outcome can generate frustration among those who feel excluded. Human behavior responds strongly to perceived inequity. If individuals believe systems are unevenly accessible or reward insider advantages, resentment can grow. That social response is part of the broader policy equation and often shapes long-term political and economic reactions.
The new socialist slogan is, "Trust us, this time it won't be a mess." So, when the post-war Labour government in Britain was about to get started, one of their leading lights was a socialist named Nurian Bevan. He said, what could go wrong? He said, we have a nation bedded on coal, surrounded by fish. It would take an organizational genius to have a shortage of either. In 3 years, they had a shortage of both. That's socialism.
Beneath the humor and blunt delivery, Rogan's core critique is that complex cities cannot be run on improvisation. Structural economic challenges rarely respond to emotionally satisfying slogans. Expanding the money supply is not, in his framing, a durable housing strategy. At best, it is a temporary lever, and at worst, it risks fueling inflation and broader dysfunction. Maher's warning is more strategic. He argues that if Democrats attach themselves to the most ideologically aggressive public faces, they risk losing the voters who ultimately decide elections. His point isn't that those voters are hostile or malicious. It's that many of them are practical. They prioritize stability, competence, and visible results over experimentation. Whitney Cummings adds a cultural dimension, pointing to what she sees as hypocrisy in modern political messaging, the tendency to signal moral superiority while overlooking contradictions. When you combine those threads, the concern becomes larger than one proposal. It's about a political climate that sometimes rewards the performance of solutions more than the delivery of outcomes. None of this denies that the housing crisis is real. It is severe. It is squeezing families. It is reshaping cities in ways that push ordinary earners farther out while concentrating opportunity at the top. People are frustrated and they want relief. That urgency is precisely why poorly designed policy can be dangerous. When people are hurting, they are more willing to embrace simple promises. If those promises rest primarily on printing money and capping payments without expanding supply, the long-term correction could be harsher than the original imbalance. So, here's the question to sit with. Do you prefer leaders who offer immediate reassurance, or leaders who can walk through the slower, more technical path to improvement? The less exciting route is often the one grounded in incentives and long-term stability. Now it's your turn. Are Rogan and Maher overreacting, or are they identifying genuine risks? Is a 30% income-based housing model a compassionate safeguard, or could it strain supply and pricing over time? Drop your take in the comments. I read them, and I'm genuinely interested in where people land on this. And if you want more breakdowns of political clips without the polished PR framing, hit like, subscribe, and share this with that one friend who thinks expanding the money supply is a shortcut. Economic reality eventually asserts itself. The only open question is who ends up absorbing the cost.